Let's get started right away. We have a packed agenda today and tomorrow, and our first speakers today are no less than the founder and CEO of Canonical, Mr. Mark Shuttleworth. Please welcome Mr. Shuttleworth.
Thank you, Sebastian, and hello to everybody who's joining us online. And most of all, hello to so many wonderful people that have joined us today here in London. It's quite a privilege to look around the room and see some legends of open source, and I think perhaps some future legends of open source as well. I'm both excited to hear what you have to say and honored that you would come and be part of this forum. And that's really the humbling thing about everything that we do in open source. We are surrounded by giants, and while each of us has our part to play, each of us has our pride and our investment in the thing that we're trying to do, I think it's incredibly important to step back and just appreciate the way in which we work together to build a future that really couldn't exist any other way. Anytime I see something that we've wrestled with and grappled with and achieved, I'm constantly reminded of how much of that thing came from elsewhere because of open source. Right? We have this extraordinary interdependence. Even our rivalries are a source of interdependence. At a time in the world when technology is balkanizing and countries and geopolitical blocs are saying they want sovereignty and independence, in every single case, the strategy for independence depends on a shared thing, which is open source, right? And so this is an extraordinary counter to the prevailing narrative about technology, right? I absolutely believe it is open source, leaning on open source, that will enable people all over the world to build their better futures. Of course, our motivations are diverse, right? My favorite motivation for open source is rare but beautiful, and it is just joy, right? The joy of building something, getting it right, making it for other people, the love of that thing and the craftsmanship of that thing is a truly wonderful motivation, and a lot of meaningful open source is built on that. But we also see people engage in open source and contribute to open source out of commercial strategy. Sometimes we see that out of a desire to create something that wouldn't exist any other way. Sometimes we see it as sabotage, right? In the game of creative destruction and the commoditization of somebody else's business to create an advantage. These things are all true, but what they fuel is a rising tide for everybody that is deep and meaningful and extraordinary. Sometimes things are built in open source purely out of shared need, out of a desire to be part of something, to have a shared experience, a community. That's another really beautiful motivation for what happens around us every day. In all of that, the distribution is an unusual thing. And a distribution is an aggregator. Right? A distribution exists to honor and represent and pass on the work of others, right? And there's a set of obligations, I believe, a distribution has, right, in that complicated landscape, right? And part of that is about finding the balance between the choices that we make for joy or for strategy and the choices that other people want to make, right? The things they want to use. And this is a complicated dance, but one that I take very, very seriously. I think distributions are in a privileged position, right? And I'm very mindful of the fact that for an individual creator, an individual innovator, an individual project, an individual upstream, the constraints on them are very different to the constraints on us. And that's why I think it's important that distributions essentially make their choices, but they also enable other people to make different choices, right? It's important essentially to enable people to explore territory that you yourself can't or won't explore. And that brings me to the other side of the coin, which is the distribution as innovator, right? Very fundamentally, we distribute. Very fundamentally, we essentially bring together work from other people and pass that to the world. But we also have an obligation to innovate. We also have an obligation to think deeply about the shared concerns, the problems that no single upstream can solve for themselves. An upstream can choose Java, but they can't necessarily choose the Java interpreter you're going to use, that they're going to have to, that their joy is going to be expressed on, right? And so there's a really important obligation on us to innovate in those areas of shared concern. Security, right? The Postgres community, which is an absolutely extraordinary community of diverse collection of organizations, really something unusual even in open source, right? Many companies collaborating and competing at the same time on a relatively egalitarian basis. But think about the trust they put in distributions to essentially say, well, you're going to enable people to use our work, right? And that community can't determine things like the security of your data, but we can have a significant impact on that, right? Operations. You know, to build the tool is one thing. To deploy the tool at scale, to deploy the tool in an environment that is dynamic, that is changing, to deploy software in heterogeneous environments at the cloud and at the edge, right? These are complicated concerns, and they represent really the cost of free software, right? Again, these are things that I think distributions really should think deeply about. Efficiency, right? If you think about energy, think about a CPU burning energy. We have an obligation, regardless again of the the prevailing narrative. We have an obligation to make sure that that energy is spent well. And software doesn't do anything without consuming energy. If we can make your software burn less energy by using the latest capabilities on the chips that you have just bought, then that is a beautiful thing that we can do for the Postgres community and for the people using Postgres and for the people making chips that can work more efficiently, right? Integration, the idea that nobody uses a piece of software in isolation. People use software together to get things done. And the responsibility that we have to think about that integration process and to make that simpler, cheaper, more reliable, less of a burden, right, in order to get more out of the generosity of the people who contributed that open source in the beginning. Now, when we were born, we already had many, many Linux distributions, and very good ones. We had Linux distributions that defined themselves as commercial. They were businesses. And we had distributions that defined themselves as for the love of it, or for the interest of it, or for the benefit of others. And we chose a more difficult path, to be both a commercial distribution, but one that deeply valued and thought about social impact. The world didn't need another proprietary Linux, but potentially there was an opportunity to create something that had as a deep commitment the upliftment and the outreach to people who would be excluded by something that was purely commercial. For me, it is a very deep part of what we do, right? It amplifies what I would call the fundamental generosity of anybody who makes an open source contribution, right? Anybody who makes an open source contribution, no matter what their motivations, is doing something profoundly generous, right? Giving away their insights, giving away the benefit of their intellectual wrestling with a hard problem. And that is a beautiful thing. We choose to amplify that, right? By making sure that it can land in the hands of people who could never participate in the top tier of the economic race that is the software and technology industry, but who personally can benefit deeply from that open source. In that way, I really believe we unleash innovation in a way that a purely commercial story can't unleash innovation. how many entrepreneurs, how many innovators, how many scientists and doctors have ideas but don't have access to the tooling or the markets to essentially get those ideas to market. For me, it is a deep privilege and obligation to build a bridge between the wealthiest parts of the world and industry and the poorest parts of the world and future industries. Sometimes we call it our Robin Hood problem, although I'm not so sure that I want to be characterized as stealing from the world's wealthiest organizations, so much as figuring out how to offer value and then how to turn that value into something that essentially can light a spark of goodness anywhere in the world. In this way, we pay it forward, right? Many of us here in the room are where we are because somebody else made some open source. And in this way, we can be part of essentially paying that forward to the next generation of people who will do wonderful things with open source. Now, as I look around the room, I'm reminded of how complex the ecosystems are in which we live and breathe. And I want to start really at the foundation of it in the silicon world. Now, I confess, I don't know how to make CPUs. I'm told that it's a little bit like making software only harder. and what I can understand about it is that the economics of making silicon are brutal, absolutely brutal. And very few people really trouble themselves with trying to balance the truth about technology and the truth about economics. They're both difficult, a bit too much to hold in your head for most people. But I really try to think about, well, economics and technology. And I think in the silicon world, economics are brutal. The investments that are required long before a return can be generated, the uncertainty around those investments, the vision required on a 5-year type timeline to essentially say that is what we're going to build, that's what we're going to deliver in 5 years' time. That is what we think the world will want to, how the world will want to make its electrons dance. I find that extraordinary. The spectrum of silicon, right? We tend to narrow our focus to a hero product, a hero narrative, whether we're drawn to margins or performance or something else. But in this room, we are surrounded by silicon. We're surrounded by silicon, doing all sorts of things for us. And the future is even more immersion of compute in the worlds around us. And I really want to salute and celebrate silicon companies that are able to bring this intense intellectual focus to that game across such a vast spectrum of compute. Of course, silicon needs software. That investment, that bet, that vision of the future will only be realized if software takes advantage of it. And so it's a profound obligation, I think, that we have to join with silicon companies in figuring out when their 5-year bet, when it's time to ship their 5-year bet on the future of silicon, that the software is there, ready to go, in the best form that we possibly can make it to see what's going to happen in the market, right? To bring that to reality. So in a very real sense, the measure of something like Ubuntu is the extent to which it embraces and reaches out and collaborates and partners with the people who are making the silicon that the world is going to run on in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time. And I'm delighted to see, looking around the room here, people who have partnered with us to essentially take those bets on the future together. And my firm commitment is that we will always be a neutral platform for your bets on the future of silicon and software together. If I come one step up from silicon, we see the extraordinary world of clouds. Now, I think it's easy to underestimate the unbelievable impact that cloud computing, public cloud computing, has had on the pace of innovation. It is as if we lifted enterprise compute out of the mud, right, and into a cleaner place where we could more objectively, more rigorously understand what we were doing, how we were doing it, right? And that's an extraordinary thing. I'm not of the view that all compute is going to end up in one giant cloud, right? So I deeply believe in the importance of public cloud computing, its centrality to the future, its forward motion as an efficient way to harness silicon at scale for centralized computation. But I think there's another benefit that we've all got from cloud computing, which is to rethink computing fundamentally and bring that to other domains, right? Domains that the cloud can't serve, right? I see people adopting cloud-native practices, all sorts of places around the compute spectrum that have nothing to do with the cloud, right? And that's a really profound, I think, acceleration of innovation in the world today. It is, of course, a transformation, again, of economics. This balance of economics and technology that is so interesting. And a call to every organization to focus on its core value, right? To a sort of a statement that common infrastructure, if it's not open source, which is a digital commons, should essentially be standardized and contested and competitive, and to a certain extent driven by people for whom it truly is core and meaningful. Our goal, again, is to enable people to get the most out of the clouds that they choose. There are reasons to choose this cloud over that cloud, right? People make these choices after complex analysis, and clouds invest in differentiation, right, which is risk, much as the silicon companies do, right? It is going along with their differentiation, going along with their unique risk-taking values that essentially enables us to be the best possible partner to them. I'm struck by how often those partnerships go together, how often we'll find ourselves in a room with a cloud and a silicon vendor, right? Having to figure out how to express what both of them want to put into the market, right? And how to make that feel natural and easy for anybody building on open source. From there, I want to go to ISV partnerships. It's a fairly easy thing to turn into controversy, but I value and we value both commercial and open software. I think software has changed lives meaningfully in the 20th and 21st century, right? And it simply would not have done that if it was limited only to open source software or only to commercial software, right? For me, this is not ideological. And so I think the way I think about it is that the digital commons lifts the tide for everybody. Again, there are shared concerns. No matter who you are in the software industry, if you're an open source community, if you're a creator, if you're a scientist, or if you're a business, there are all of these shared concerns, all of these shared interdependencies, things over which you have little control, right? As much as you can control your piece, it will live in a complex ecosystem. And our goal is to make that complex ecosystem as simple, as trustworthy, as reliable, and as efficient as possible. And then I want to come to our community partnerships. This is where I think we get into joy, and we get into shared experience, and we get into culture. There are so many different reasons why people join a community, right? Sometimes it is simply for the community, right? Because the people are great. Sometimes it's for the puzzle. Sometimes it's for the mission. Sometimes it's to get away from the rest of your family, I think, right? But that continues to be a deeply important part of the open source story and the open source experience. This is why we have so many commercially unsuccessful flavors of Ubuntu, right? It's because commerce is only one dimension of what we should think about and what we should do. It is, again, our firm commitment that a creator who has an idea, something that is important to them and a community, is able to leverage Ubuntu so that they don't have to worry about all of the other things that are necessary if they want to be reliable and trustworthy for other people, but not necessary for them to express their vision or to express their innovation or their idea. This is a very long way for me to talk about Ubuntu itself. I think most people know that there is an African philosophy that says the measure of a person is the impact they have had on the health and well-being and happiness of the people around them. It says that you can't think of yourself as successful if the people around you haven't also been successful, haven't benefited from that success. And I feel that very, very keenly when I look around the room and think about these partnerships, right? Our success must feed the success of others, right? We are, because they are, the measure of what we are is the measure of the impact that we've had all around this room and all around our shared ecosystem. That really is why we chose to call it Ubuntu. So on that note, let me briefly talk about my hope for this summit. Now, in life is rebirth, and this is something of a rebirth. When we started, our summit was our single event where everything happened. We brought everyone from Canonical together with everyone in the community, and it was a little crazy. It was very unconference, but it was kind of beautiful. And as we've grown, and as open source itself has grown, there've become more events that essentially speak clearly to specific topics, right? Open source has become a very big, very rich, very complicated place. And so we thought it would be interesting to take the opportunity to rethink how we balance the different aspects of what we do. You know, on the one hand, for all of us, it is important and meaningful to essentially create a place where we can meet folks who are just at the start of their journey with open source and whose motivations are entirely unclear, right? And whose prospects are entirely unclear. At the other end of that spectrum, right, we thought we now have the opportunity to pull together something really punchy, something really celebratory of the very, very best work that's happening in Ubuntu, at Canonical, in the wider open source ecosystem, and amongst our partners, right? And so we struggled with the question of how to do all of that in an event, how to build an event, or how to combine events in a way that would essentially allow us to do all of that. And in the end, the idea that we're pursuing under Sebastian's leadership is that we can't do it all in one event. But what we can do is we can essentially start with a series of grassroots events, Ubuntu Summits that are open to everybody, that enable people who have an idea that is completely untested or a desire to get their first steps in open source. If we could run those events on a less formal basis, closer to people, North America and South America, North Africa, South Africa, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Northern Asia, Southern Asia, all the way down under, right? we could create a set of events that are grassroots accessible. They will be messier. They will be less predictable. They will have moments of pure joy and surprise and delight, and moments of not so much joy and and delight, right? But they will create an opportunity and a door that anybody can walk through. And the opportunity for us then is to say, out of all of that, what is the very best? What is the stuff that is sheer delight? What is the stuff that we really want to broadcast to the world? And then to bring that to this environment so that we can celebrate it together, and we can really show people stuff that they have never thought to inquire about, never thought to explore, never thought could be possible, but which is a joy to behold. So I hope that is what we are launching here today. Now, I haven't talked about Ubuntu. And the reason for that is because there's someone better placed to talk about Ubuntu, to talk about what's exciting in our latest release, why that was the set of things that we chose to focus on, and how that sets us up for the immediate future. So I'm going to hand you over to Jon Seager, VP of Ubuntu Engineering. Jon.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and it's really great to see so many faces of people we've been working with in a professional capacity over the past 9 months, but also personally, there are some people in this room who probably don't realize the impact that they have had on my own journey in Linux. Some of the podcasting fellas in this room certainly have been the soundtrack to my professional life for some time now, particularly during the earlier years of my career where I spent far too much time in a car. So earlier this year, I published an article entitled Engineering Ubuntu for the Next 20 Years, and the title of this was inspired by a very famous security researcher called Haroon Meer, who gave a talk at Black Hat, I think in 2015, entitled What Got Us Here Won't Get Us There. And this was something of a recognition of the success that we have enjoyed with Ubuntu and the kind of reach that we have achieved, but also a recognition that if we were going to enjoy the same levels of success in the future, and continue to kind of achieve what Mark is trying to do with Ubuntu, that some things might need to change. And I anchored that around 4 pillars, things that I wanted to focus on. And I'm not going to go into huge detail about those today. If you search for Engineering Ubuntu for the next 20 years, you'll see the entire thing. But I wanted to highlight today some of the kind of, I guess, highlights of how that's gone over the last 9 months and give you an idea of the sorts of things I'd like to focus on over the next few months. So firstly, the Questing Quokka. It's a little bit of a shame that this one wasn't an R, so we couldn't use rusty as the adjective. But I'm really delighted with how this showed up. In particular, the release team. I was here 2 weeks ago during our release sprint, and I find it difficult to articulate the difference in professionalism and polish and efficiency that I saw compared to 6 months ago. All that is to say is the work that we have been doing behind the scenes on trying to refine our process and really understand what it is that we need to do in order to push a release more frequently was really apparent to me. And some of you will have seen that we did the monthly releases this cycle, and that was really from the age-old philosophy of if it hurts, do it more, which I think you'll hear a little bit more about later on. So I was really pleased to see how that showed up in the end. This, which turned out to be as much about oxidizing as it did polarizing in some cases, but I'm delighted to be sponsoring this work. And this isn't necessarily all about us. I think this is as much about the projects that we are championing and including in Ubuntu by default as it is about Ubuntu. There is something very interesting to me about the Rust community, and it's nothing to do with the language. It is rather to do with the group of people it has attracted and the way they like to think about software and think about resilience in software. And I choose the word resilience carefully as the kind of intersection of security and reliability and efficiency and quality. The individuals that I have worked with as part of those upstream projects and their broader communities have been an absolute delight. And while I am sure that there will be a couple of rough edges over the coming months, I'm absolutely certain from the experience I've had so far that we will fix those expediently and it will all be smooth sailing for the LTS. We certainly caught some attention with this. And this is, if I think about the communication pillar of the Engineering Ubuntu post. One of the commitments I made, or one of the, I suppose, mandates that I made, was that we would do more talking externally. And this has made a really, really big difference. So you will have seen, hopefully, that every week on our discourse, there is a post from a different member of our engineering, kind of internal engineering organization. And while this started out as something that I asked the leads of those teams to do, I'm delighted to see that various other people inside Canonical and outside of Canonical in our community have picked up on this and started talking more about what they do in a more long-form format. And it's really nice to see people getting excited about Ubuntu again, particularly as we head towards our next LTS. This was some of the articles. If you haven't seen it, there is a blog tag on the discourse, so if you are interested in following the work of the Desktop Foundation, Server, Debcrafters, and general Ubuntu Engineering org, take a look at the blog tag on the discourse, and you should see something fresh at least once a week. It's more like twice a week at this point. And we've also put a huge amount of effort into our documentation story, which I suppose over 20 years, that's a long time, and things have become a little bit fragmented. And one of the things that I would really like to improve in Ubuntu is the story we tell to a potential contributor, a new contributor, a first-time contributor. And to me, we had slipped a little bit there. There was a lot of knowledge that was in people's heads. Some of it was written down, some of it wasn't. It was often dispersed. And so with a little bit of help from Daniele, who's in the audience, and his team, we have gone on a mammoth effort to essentially bring all of that into one place under something called the Ubuntu Project Docs, which is all about, it's not about how to use Ubuntu, it's not about what makes Ubuntu work, it's about how we build Ubuntu. How can you as a new contributor get involved? What do the processes mean? What does MIR mean? What does SRU mean? Who are the people responsible for those? And if you're a developer, how can you get started? And to be clear, this is just the beginning of this effort, and we have a lot more work to do, but I'm really impressed to see how much the team managed to get done just in the space of 6 months. And this will essentially be the successor to things like the Ubuntu Wiki, the Canonical Wiki for people who are internally, some of the content that was on the old Ubuntu forums, and the hope is to put that somewhere that is centralized and easy to contribute to and easy to search and understand. So what's next? Well, probably a little bit less crazy for the next 6 months because we have an LTS to deliver. Certainly some stabilization of the work we've done with some of the Rust utilities, but there's also some new challenges that we're going to take on too. It's not just about polish at this point. So we have been having discussions about exactly what Mark said. How can we make the best use of different processors and different generations of silicon in Ubuntu? We should probably have a bit of a think about how we want to enable users of AI, developers of AI to use Ubuntu. So we've done some thinking about that. We've also been thinking about how to kind of increase the ease of operations for the enterprise and the home user with things like our TPM-backed full disk encryption, which will land in general availability in 2604 for the desktop, and you'll see the beginnings of that for the server too. That's just a really kind of sneak peek. If you've got any particular questions, I'll be here for the next few days where I will answer most, probably not all of your questions about what we're planning, but needless to say, I'm very excited to see what the team can do with the next LTS. Thank you very much.